Hi, everybody, and welcome. I was joking with Erin this morning that I'm in the hot seat now. So now I get to figure out exactly how challenging it is to take a meaningful and complicated topic and squish it into 15 minutes. So thanks for joining me. So let's get right to work here in terms of what we're going to talk about. So career trajectory of days gone by. What I have on the slide for you here is a career development theory by Donald Super circa about the 1950s. And this is really how we used to think careers would develop. It really wasn't that long ago that most people would make an occupational choice that lasted a lifetime. Early career theories, as I mentioned, demonstrated that most people's working lives were quite linear. Make a choice when you're young, grow in that job, we'd hope, obviously, retire. And often retire with a pension and a gold watch. And you can look back and have a 30, 35, 40-year career with one employer doing, in some cases, the same job over that whole lifetime. Of course, these kinds of jobs still exist in our teachers, our doctors, our electricians, our plumbers. We can spend the next 15 minutes listing all of these jobs. So that absolutely hasn't gone away. But what is different today is that it's actually much more common to see people make multiple occupational choices across their working lives. Some of those occupational choices will be small. You might be doing the same general job, but working for multiple different employers as you're growing your career, as you're moving around the country, around the world. But for others, they're making massive occupational shifts. They might have, started at a grocery store and worked up to a manager position in their early 20s, and then all of a sudden back to school to do something else, and all of a sudden in their 40s back to school and to start over a re-career. However, try as we might, there are many of us in society that are very stuck in this notion that if you choose wisely in your youth, that's about it, that career will take you through your life. We still ask kids in school, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? As if at 17, any of us knew what we wanted to do when we were 40. So what we do now in still trying to force this question on people, or force the answer, is that we really fail to acknowledge that humans change and grow. We learn new things, and that the world of work is quite a bit more challenging and significantly more complicated than it ever used to be. So what do we mean when we talk about the world of work is complicated? Just a couple of things that come to mind for me. And again, we could spend our whole time together talking about how the world of work is complicated. Obviously, globalization is one thing. Far more than ever before, you can now be working for an organization whose headquartered is somewhere else in the world. You could actually be a Canadian as an expat working somewhere else and kind of coming home every once in a while. We obviously have newcomers coming to Canada. Canada heavily relies on immigrants and refugees for their economy, for their labor market. So there's lots of shifts as people move around the world. You can also be working from home with or without COVID, and your employer is actually somewhere else, whether that's in another town, in your same province, in your same state, or in another country. We also have this notion, and we continue to see lots of literature, that robots are taking over the world. I can assure you they aren't. For what we see, whether it's robots or artificial intelligence, absolutely there is a segment of the labor market that is continuing to shorten or contract because of artificial intelligence and robots, mechanization. But the reality is other jobs are being created at the same time. So, and overall, the thinking is that it will still be net growth, that there will still be more jobs. Those jobs are looking distinctly different than they ever used to. Even jobs that have existed for a long, long time, mechanics, for example, how they diagnose problems in cars are much, much different than they used to be. We also, because of this, have multiple transitions. We're moving in and out of the labor market, in and out of learning and work opportunities, in and out of school, much more than we ever used to, as the world of work changes and we evolve and we have to go and learn new skills. We also have had this whole thing around gig work and with Uber and Lyft and Uber Eats and all of these, this gig economy that, in some cases we could probably argue has always existed. I've always worked, or almost always worked, on contract positions. Some of those were very short term. speaking opportunities. Other things were much longer, but I've always had this notion of gig. I just didn't call myself a gig worker. I was self-employed. I was a project-based consultant, and now we have this notion of gig work. So the literature is really unclear on how we're describing gig work, but what we know is that some of this work can, like my experience, be very, very positive. It's given me incredible opportunities, but in some cases, in a lot of cases, and perhaps too many cases, gig work is known to be quite precarious. And we're seeing more and more of the economy, more and more people forced into this very, very short term, 15-minute car ride kind of work. Stress and anxiety is at an all-time high, and we're all feeling that now more than ever with COVID. That makes the world of work significantly more complicated than it ever used to be. And obviously, when you layer on COVID and the fact that we are in month 8 or 9 of a global pandemic, and unemployment is reaching double digits, then that certainly makes again the world of work quite a bit more complicated than even 20 years ago. So what do we do? For those that are actively participating in how their work lives change, some are taking a very planful, structured approach. They carefully analyze their options. They set very clear goals and create detailed action plans. Their path is quite clear. Others are much more organic. They make the most of unplanned events and opportunities. They're the people that get offered an opportunity to take on a new project or take on a new role and think, oh, sure, I'll do that. That sounds like a great idea. And then they go research and figure out how it was done. It never occurred to them to ever do that kind of work or take on that kind of project. I fall into that category. I've done all sorts of things and signed all sorts of contracts saying, yes, I can absolutely do that for you. And then I've gone to figure out how I actually make that happen. And these types of people truly can't answer the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And so the really important thing to note is that whether you take a very planful approach to your career, where you have, kind of your working life and your goals kind of all mapped out, you can see a path, or whether you are much more on this embrace change and where the wind takes you, neither approach is wrong. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, you got to do something. You have to have an approach. And so how do you do this? Really, it's crucially important that you know yourself and pay attention to how you are growing and changing, how you are developing new skills. You're learning new things every day, and you're developing new interests, and you're leaving old ones behind. And it's okay to say, I'm actually really, really good at doing X, but I don't want to do it anymore. It no longer lights my fire. It no longer gets me excited. So it's really important that you pay attention to this. It's also really important that you pay attention to the market. Be mindful of the trends, not only what's happening in your community, but what's happening globally. Remember, our world is so much smaller now with a diverse workforce stretched across the globe. So if you're not paying attention to what's happening outside of your community, outside of your employer, you might be quite shocked when something happens. And it's really important that you know how to use this information to manage your career. So that's a key skill in building your career your way. But of course, as the slide changes, it says it's also important to really embrace change and chance and hope, and to find ways to sustain energy when times are tough. This is where having some sort of plan can actually help you. If you know where you are today and you have some sort of vision of where you want to be, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, 4 years, 5 years from now, you can see whether you're still on track. You can see whether this is still going to happen because, again, you've paid attention to what's going on around you. You're listening to what your employer is saying, and you're paying attention to what the market is saying and what's happening in your industry. But remember, a path and a plan, even one that we design, is not a promise, because things happen. Those of us that had a really clear career path at the start of 2020, goals that we wanted to achieve this year, all of that was kind of thrown out the window with COVID. And so even though we can work really, really hard to have this path and have this really clear plan for ourselves, we can't make that promise. We really have to understand that things are going to change. And it's really important to understand that the more complex the world gets, the greater the likelihood of a meandering career trajectory, not that straight path I showed on the slide earlier. There might be side roads and switchbacks, and you might have to downshift and kind of start over and reset. So as a result, there is a critical need to attend to some of these basic career tasks that I talked about, knowing yourself, knowing the market, and really be prepared to be fully responsible for how your career evolves over time. So this leads to a really key message that I'm hoping to send today, and that is how critical it is to recognize that every decision is a career decision. Or has the potential to be. And Dr. Dave Redekop, who we were honored to have as one of our Ask an Expert speakers earlier this year, he did an amazing talk on career development and mental health. He is also a longstanding Canadian and international leader in career development. Dave did an absolutely fantastic TED talk on this topic. I highly recommend watching. So if you're interested in this notion that every career is a career decision, give that a little Google search. So as I mentioned earlier, too often people think career decisions are made when they make an occupational choice. When they answer the question, what do you want to be when you finish school? Or what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what am I going to do now? You know, obviously I'm expecting that everybody attending here today are probably students. And so you're in a program. You made a decision to go to school to then, you know, reset your career, to start your career. But your career decision making is not stopping at that point. When we peel back the layers, every decision we make is a career decision because every decision has the potential to impact the way our life and our work unfolds. So if we take our Yorkville or Toronto Film School students, whether you get to class on time, whether you study, whether you get enough sleep, whether you leave a positive or negative impression on your faculty member, on your program head, on staff at the institution, all of those are career decisions because all of those have the potential to have an impact on how your life unfolds. And perhaps some of these can be innocuous at first. You know, as former Dean of Academics for the BC campus, I used to talk to students a lot about coming to class, every class, showing up and actively participating. And there's no doubt that, you know, there'll be a set of students that say, if I miss one class, it's not really a big deal. It's not going to impact my ability to get a good job at the end of my program if I miss just one class, if I'm absent for just one class. And you're probably right. It's probably not. Of course, if it becomes a trend that, you know, it's okay for me to miss classes on occasion, or it's okay to just kind of continue to skip this class, it's not really interesting, I'm getting okay grades, that has a greater potential to impact your success in the program and your future occupation. Of course, if the one day that you decide is not a big deal, that's the day your instructor has invited an important guest speaker, or perhaps somebody doing the exact job you want to do, or working for the company you want to work for. That's your greatest wish, is when I graduate, this is where I want to work. And today's the day that the hiring manager was there and you weren't. So you just never know by making a decision to or not do something, how it's going to impact your career. The slightest, you know, it's that, how does, what's that from chaos theory? When a butterfly flaps his wings in Australia, it causes a tornado in Texas, something like that. And you have to think about that from a career perspective. So every decision that you make has the potential to be a really important career decision. Okay, so no more lectures about coming to class. I'm sure everybody gets the point that it's really those small little things, those small decisions that you're making each and every day around school, around work, around life that have the potential to lead to really big career decisions. So it's time to shine a light on your future self. As Erin mentioned, I've got almost 30 years working in career development, and it has been an absolutely unbelievable journey. And some of my coolest work started from this tiny little decision that I made, and it led to a journey that I have been very blessed. But in my 30 years in career development, at its foundation, even though I've done an incredible number of different things that some people might have a hard time seeing the pattern, seeing how they all fit together, at its foundation, at its very core, my work is governed by the fact that I truly have a fundamental belief that every person has the right to be in work that allows them to thrive, to be the best that they can be, to be valued, to be the best version of themselves, whatever that is. My best version of myself is not the same as your best version of yourself. The average person spends a third of their lives at work. So what shouldn't we all be doing everything we can to ensure that that time we invest is enjoyable, makes us happy, makes us excited? It just seems to make sense to me. So I think that that's a personal right that you all have. However, there's always a catch. To maximize your chances to build your career your way, to really be in work that allows you to thrive, that allows you to look back and say, I had a good life. You must absolutely be an active agent in how your career develops. Long gone are the days where you can sit in your cubicle, or sit in your office, or sit in the production studio and have somebody tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, come with me, I've got exciting opportunities. It just doesn't happen anymore. Employers are not responsible for managing your careers. You are. You're not a passenger in this game we call life. Your career can develop based on decisions you make or decisions that are made for you. And so it's critically important that you really take that notion of being an active agent in how your career develops, that you take responsibility for building your career your way. And as I mentioned at the outset, some of the ways that you do that is really paying attention to who you are, knowing yourself, knowing your traits and characteristics, knowing your values. Employers hire for skill and they fire for fit. So you really got to figure out who you are and how you're evolving and changing over time, and how the other things that you do in life, whether you're a parent or a spouse, where you live, whether you're active and how you're active in your community, all makes a difference for how you evolve and grow. And then the person that you bring to work every day. It makes sense that if you started a job when you were, 17 or 18, that when you're 40, you don't really want to do it anymore. And that's okay. We have to give ourselves permission to, as we change and evolve, find new things that get us excited. You also, as I mentioned earlier, have to pay attention to the market. You really have to understand how your occupation, your chosen occupation, is changing, how the market is changing, how the world is changing, and how those changes might suddenly impact you. And you kind of bring it all together. It's easier said than done, for sure. But don't forget, that's why there's this whole career development industry that's there to help you. We have a career services team at Yorkville. If you're one of our students, then obviously you can access some of these services and really get a sense of trying to figure out how do you actively manage and build your career your way, the same way that you take care of your health, the same way as you take care of your car, the same way that you look after your homes. So that's my message today in like 15 minutes. There's lots and lots and lots more that we can talk about, but it's time to open it up for questions. So we'll see if Erin's been paying attention and is going to come back, but if not, it's okay, because I normally do this. So there she is. Hey, Erin.
I am here. Yes. Can you hear me? I'm paying attention. I think that what you've discussed here today, it applies at any stage of your career. It's really important to think about.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I was listening. So to our watchers, our participants who are with us here today, if you have any questions, you'll see that there is a Q&A tab on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also ask it in the chat, as Ruth has. So we have a question from Ruth, who says, many youth who are not extroverted have a challenging time to put themselves out there. Oh, what a great question. What are your suggestions for them?
Yeah. Okay. So here's my rant, Ruth. Most people don't know this, but on any assessment related to introversion and extroversion, I score off the chart on the introvert scale. So I'm highly introverted. This sort of stuff, this is actually easy because there's nobody here. There's no other people. I can't see all of you, but I also talk internationally in front of hundreds of people. So you have to remember that putting ourselves out there is a skill. It's a skill we can learn. It's a skill we can learn, like public speaking, even if our preference, which is what introversion and extroversion is. So I have a preference to be quite introverted, but I can actually develop this skill and learn to deal with the anxiety and the discomfort that putting ourselves out there can cause. So a couple of the tricks that I do. First of all, I'm not a great networker, so I tend to avoid networking events. If I go, I'm the person in the corner hoping that somebody will come and talk to me, because I'm not very good at it, because it's not my preference. And it's not a skill that I've particularly developed. So what I would do instead is, as I'm going to an event, I look at who might be there and I make plans to, can we meet? So I really manage the room as best I can. So I will make reach outs to people using social media, and I will do one-on-one coffees and stuff like that with them. So it's really important to understand we absolutely live in an extroverted world, but there is a room for introverts. It's just that they have to then manage how they're going to do that and develop the skill and some measure of comfort in order to be in those kind of uncomfortable situations. So I hope that helps. It's a great question, and it's complicated, but it is a skill.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm also pretty introverted, and it's definitely something you have to work on developing as a skill.
Yeah.
So if there are additional questions, please, now is your opportunity to mine a mind with 30 years of experience here. We're getting free career.
I'm getting off easy. This is good.
You are.
Free career development advice. Fantastic.
I was about to ask you a question. I am going to ask my question, but Linda now has a question. I will defer to Linda. How do you suggest people get themselves out there during COVID? I'm assuming in an employment context.
I think this is where it's really important to remember to nurture your network. So, who in your life is doing things or might know somebody that is doing the things that you want to do, and then make those reach out. It's also important to remember that what we can have an ethical and moral debate about the value of social media, but realistically, it is actually a very good place to meet people if you are active. I did a presentation at a conference several years ago on using Twitter, but not to tweet. And so, because you can engage in and you can learn from and you can follow important people but there's no requirement that you post anything. So you can use social media to kind of get a sense of who's out there and what they're saying. And this works for introverts too. So it goes back to Ruth's question, and then kind of make those reach out. So you can, see what somebody has said on LinkedIn or somebody that's posted on Twitter. You can read their article, and then you can maybe reach out to them and see if they've got 10 or 15 minutes for an informational interview. As students, this is where your faculty are a huge part of your really, really important network. If you're not, making yourself known to faculty in a positive way, then that is a lost opportunity. So I think there's lots of opportunity to continue to use email, to engage with social media, and to use Zoom, as much as we all have Zoom fatigue, to really nurture and build an important network. Your network doesn't have to be huge; it can be small, but with really important people that have the potential to help you.
And since I do manage the school's social media, I'll give a little shout out here. I'll take the opportunity. Both Toronto Film School and Yorkville University, our LinkedIn activities and our LinkedIn network, Yorkville has more than 10,000 individuals who are connected to its LinkedIn, and TFS is just about 900 people away from having 10,000 within there. So
wow.
Please join us there. They're amazing spaces to connect with, your fellow alumni, fellow students. Louisa has asked, how do you recommend that someone goes about changing their career? Wow.
Oh boy. We might not have time for that, but that might have to be a Zoom call afterwards. But so obviously to start, people have to, realistically, I know people have to pay bills, put food on their table, all of those sorts of things. So, some of the realistic things that I talk to clients about is, can you afford to do this right now? Right? Like, do you have actually the ability to potentially exit the labor market, not have an income, go back to school, and kind of start over? And what does that start over look like? What's the salary like? So you have to do some very practical soul searching in order to have a wholesale career change. The other thing is that when working with clients is I would normally look at, kind of what are all of those things that I talked about earlier. Who are you as a person now? What are your skills? What are your motivated skills? Remember that the skills that you have aren't necessarily the skills that you want to use. So a good example that I often use is, I can still, after all of these years, keyboard at over 100 words a minute. That does not mean I want to spend my life as a data entry person. It's just a skill that I have, and it's very, very useful, but it's not one that I'm motivated to use or build a life around. So to think about what are your motivated skills? What are the things that really get you excited? What are your preferences, your personality preferences, introversion, extroversion, big thinker, organized, all of those sorts of pieces? What do you really value? Like, what what would get you up every day and get you excited to do? Because that's really going to make the biggest difference in your life. And then you have to look at, okay, well, this is who I am as a person. Where do I fit in the labor market? And with, 40 or 50,000 jobs in the labor market and jobs dropping off and new jobs being created every day, there's probably lots of opportunity. So that's kind of how I would start, is you first look inwards and then you look out.
I have a follow-up question on that, just because you've mentioned values a few times. And I wonder if you have any kind of brief way of saying, like, how do you really dig in and figure out what your values are in your work life?
Yeah, you can, I mean, obviously there's a checklist and assessments and all of those things that you can do, and our career services department can help people with that. But the biggest exercise that I have people do is if they strip away everything else, I have all that I need. I don't need to worry about money. I don't need to worry about this. I don't need to worry about all of these kind of practical things that I absolutely understand, you have to worry about. Then what are the things that mean most to you? Like, what are your deepest values? What is critically important to you? If you're, in your 90s and talking to your great grandchildren, what are the things that you want to share with them about, what really means to you as a life that's well lived? For some people, it's helping people, it's making a difference. Some people are, passionate about saving the world, like there's really making a difference with homeless populations or disenfranchised people. And for some people, it's making money. I mean, the reality is it's completely okay if your primary reason on this earth is to make a lot of money. That's okay too. Nobody's going to judge it, right? Like, because it's your value. And so it's really by starting by looking inward and saying, who am I as a person, and what mark do I want to leave on this world? And how do I put that into words in terms from a value proposition in terms of what's critically important.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Jamie says that they have a 53-year-old client who is talking themselves out of changing their career due to age, being the oldest person in the class, So what would your advice be to a client that is kind of on the fence about returning to school to pursue a new career?
Well, this is, questions are very complicated. Very, very good questions. So obviously, I think the first thing is my style is not to ignore the obvious. Ageism exists. As a matter of fact, CERIC, CERIC, if anybody wants to Google it, has just been doing a brilliant webinar series on engagement with older workers. And the reality is there is stigma of older workers in the workplace. There absolutely is. And so, clients have to deal with that. So I would label it and talk about how are we going to deal with it. You also have to deal with deeply ingrained things of the I am too old to change. So, it's in some work, we really try to sugarcoat the deep-seated concerns that clients have, and that's not actually helpful. So it's helpful to label it and then create a plan about, well, how are we going to deal with it? So how are we going to write a resume that shows the wisdom in your lived experiences, but also perhaps doesn't give a hint to how old you are? How are you going to show up at an interview? How are you going to do all of these sorts of things? But really, you have to have those realistic conversations with clients. And the other thing is that, what do you most fear about making a career change at that age? For some clients, it's that they completely lack their family support, because at this age, they shouldn't be doing that anymore. So, there's a lot of societal stuff that goes on, and family of origin stuff that goes around some of this. So I would unpack that so that, clients are really making informed decisions. And then, because it's okay to say, oh, but you're not too old. But unless you deal with some of that really internal stuff, the client's not going to own it. That's where I'd start.